It was a perfect Saturday morning in Willowbrook Estates, one of those suburban developments where every lawn is precisely manicured and every mailbox painted the approved shade of forest green. I had just finished my second cup of coffee and was looking forward to a peaceful morning of fishing in my backyard pond. You see, when I purchased this property 3 years ago, the small decorative pond was one of the main selling points. The previous owner had stocked it with bass and bluegill, and I had spent countless weekends enjoying the quiet solitude of casting a line just steps from my back door. What I didn't anticipate was Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood tranquility and president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Karen was the type of person who measured her neighbor's grass with a ruler and kept a detailed log of every infraction, real or imagined. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that never seemed to move, regardless of wind conditions, and she wore her HOA president badge like a sheriff's star in the Old West. As I set up my fishing chair beside the pond, I noticed Karen's distinctive silver SUV pulling into my driveway. This was never a good sign. Through my kitchen window, I watched as she marched across my lawn, clipboard in hand, wearing her signature white capris and a polo shirt with the Willowbrook Estates logo embroidered on the chest. Her expression suggested she had discovered something deeply offensive to her sense of order. Karen, in her most authoritative voice, "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" she called out, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had caught a criminal in the act. I looked up from my tackle box with what I hoped was a pleasant smile. "Good morning, Karen. I'm fishing. Beautiful morning for it, don't you think?" Karen, incredulous, "Fishing? In a residential neighborhood? I don't think so. This is a violation of at least 3 HOA regulations, and I'm going to need you to pack up this fishing operation immediately." The term fishing operation made it sound like I was running some kind of industrial seafood processing plant rather than simply holding a fishing rod beside a small pond. I remained seated, continuing to organize my tackle. "I'm sorry, Karen, but I'm fishing in my own backyard pond. This is my property, and there's nothing in the HOA bylaws that prohibits fishing." Karen, her voice rising, "First of all, any outdoor recreational activity that could be considered a nuisance falls under Section 4.7 of the Community Guidelines. Second, you're using equipment that wasn't pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. And third, this pond wasn't designed for fishing. It's a decorative water feature." I had to admire her creativity, even if her interpretation of the rules was wildly incorrect. "Karen, I've read the HOA bylaws cover to cover, twice. Section 4.7 refers to activities that create noise disturbances or attract crowds. I'm one person, sitting quietly, and the only sound I'm making is the occasional splash of a fish jumping. As for the pond, it was here when I bought the house, and the previous owner specifically mentioned it was stocked for fishing." Karen, not backing down, "Well, I'll be checking the Architectural Review Committee records for any permits related to this pond. In the meantime, I'm classifying this as a commercial fishing operation, which is strictly prohibited in residential areas." Commercial fishing operation. The woman had truly outdone herself this time. I was sitting in a lawn chair with a simple rod and reel, not exactly what anyone would consider a commercial enterprise. "Karen, I'm not selling fish. I'm not running a business. I'm simply enjoying a hobby on my own property." Karen, pulling out her phone, "We'll see about that. I'm calling the police to report this unauthorized activity. They'll straighten this out." And there it was, the nuclear option. Karen's go-to solution for any situation where her authority was questioned was to involve law enforcement. I had witnessed her call the police on neighbors for parking half an inch over the sidewalk, for having their garbage cans out 30 minutes too early, and for hanging Christmas lights that were, according to her measurements, 2 inches too low. While Karen stood at the edge of my property, presumably dialing 911, I continued fishing. The irony wasn't lost on me that her loud, increasingly agitated phone conversation was creating more disturbance than my quiet fishing ever could. I could hear her explaining to the emergency dispatcher that there was a situation in her neighborhood that required immediate police intervention. Karen, speaking into her phone, "Yes, I need officers at 1234 Maple Lane immediately. There's a man conducting unauthorized fishing activities in violation of Homeowners Association regulations. He's being completely uncooperative and refuses to cease his illegal activities." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The way she described it, you would think I was running some kind of underground fishing tournament rather than sitting peacefully beside a pond that had been designed and stocked specifically for fishing. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. Officer Martinez was a veteran cop who I recognized from previous Karen-related incidents in the neighborhood. His partner, Officer Thompson, was younger and seemed genuinely puzzled by the nature of the call. They approached my backyard with the weary expressions of people who had dealt with frivolous complaints before. Officer Martinez, with barely concealed amusement, "Good morning, sir. We received a call about some kind of fishing violation." I stood up and shook both officers' hands. "Good morning, officers. I'm fishing in my backyard pond. Mrs. Whitmore seems to believe this violates some kind of law or regulation." Karen immediately inserted herself into the conversation. Karen, speaking rapidly, "Officers, this man is conducting unauthorized fishing activities in a residential neighborhood. The HOA bylaws clearly state that any outdoor recreational activity must be pre-approved, and this pond was never intended for fishing purposes. He's also using equipment that hasn't been reviewed by the architectural committee." Officer Martinez looked at the small pond, then at my simple fishing setup, then back at Karen. "Ma'am, are you saying it's illegal for a homeowner to fish in a pond on his own property?" Karen, confidently, "It's a violation of homeowners association regulations, which have the force of law in this community." Officer Thompson examined the pond more closely. "This is a nice little pond. Are these bass? They look healthy." "The previous owner stocked it with bass and bluegill," I explained. "It's been a fishing pond for at least 10 years. Officer Martinez nodded slowly. "Ma'am, homeowners association bylaws don't supersede a person's right to use their own property for legal activities. Fishing is legal. This is his property. There's no law being broken here." Karen, becoming more agitated. "But what about the noise? What about the potential for attracting crowds? What about the fact that he didn't get permission from the Architectural Review Committee?" Officer Thompson looked around the quiet backyard. "What noise? He's sitting in a chair holding a fishing rod. And I don't see any crowds." I decided to be helpful. "Officers, I have copies of the HOA bylaws in my house if you'd like to review them. I can show you that there's no prohibition against fishing, and that Architectural Committee approval is only required for permanent structures or modifications to existing structures." Karen's face was becoming an interesting shade of red. Karen, insisting, "This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president, and I'm telling you this is a violation. Surely that carries some weight." Officer Martinez's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, being HOA president doesn't give you the authority to determine what's legal and what isn't. This gentleman is engaging in a perfectly legal activity on his own property. There's nothing here that requires police intervention." As the officers prepared to leave, Karen made what would prove to be a crucial mistake. "Karen," raising her voice, "this is harassment. I'm being harassed by both him and the police department. I know people downtown, and I'm going to make sure this gets handled properly. I'm going to file a complaint against both of you officers for failing to enforce the law." Officer Martinez stopped walking and turned back to face Karen. His expression had shifted from patient amusement to something much more serious. "Ma'am, you called us out here for a non-emergency situation. You've wasted police resources on a frivolous complaint. And now you're threatening to file false complaints against officers who are simply doing their job. I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach." But Karen was beyond reason now. Karen, practically shouting, "False complaints? I'll show you false complaints. I'm going to call my lawyer. I'm going to call the mayor. This is a conspiracy to undermine the authority of the Homeowners Association." Officer Thompson was taking notes now, which seemed to encourage Karen to continue her tirade. She accused the officers of bias, claimed they were in league with me to undermine her authority, and threatened to involve everyone from the city council to the state attorney general's office. It was a spectacular meltdown, and I found myself almost feeling sorry for her. After the officers finally left, with promises to document the entire incident, I thought that would be the end of it. Karen had made her point, the police had made theirs, and surely even she would recognize that calling the cops on a man fishing in his own backyard was an overreach. I was wrong. The next morning, I was awakened at 6 a.m. by the sound of Karen's voice in my backyard. She had apparently decided to conduct her own surveillance operation, complete with a camera and what appeared to be a tape measure. She was documenting every aspect of my fishing setup, measuring distances from the pond to my property line, and providing a running commentary that I could hear through my bedroom window. Karen, speaking into her camera, "This is day 2 of the unauthorized fishing operation. As you can see, the subject has expanded his activities to include multiple fishing rods and what appears to be a cooler for storing illegally caught fish. The multiple fishing rods were 2 poles, and the cooler contained sodas and sandwiches, not fish. But accuracy had never been Karen's strong suit. I made myself a cup of coffee and watched through my kitchen window as she conducted her investigation. By noon, she had enlisted her husband Gary, a mild-mannered accountant who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else when Karen was in full enforcement mode. Gary was holding a clipboard while Karen dictated her findings. Karen, in her most official voice, Gary, make sure you note that he's now using a portable chair, which could be considered a temporary structure requiring Architectural Review Committee approval. Also, I want you to document that he's feeding the fish, which could be considered altering the natural ecosystem of the decorative pond. I couldn't help myself. I walked outside with my coffee cup and called out, "Good morning, Karen." Gary, beautiful day for documenting completely legal activities, isn't it? Karen, not amused. This is still an ongoing investigation. I've been in contact with the city planning department, and they're very interested in your unauthorized pond modifications. What modifications would those be? I asked, genuinely curious about what she had imagined. Karen, consulting her notes, you've added fishing equipment storage, you've created a seating area, and you've introduced non-native fish food into the ecosystem. The fishing equipment storage was a small tackle box that I carried outside when I fished. The seating area was a single folding chair. And the non-native fish food was the occasional earthworm I used as bait. Karen's ability to transform the mundane into the dramatic was truly impressive. Over the next few days, Karen's campaign against my fishing activities escalated dramatically. She sent certified letters to the City Planning Department, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the State Fish and Wildlife Commission. She posted warnings on the neighborhood social media group about the ongoing violation at my address. She even attempted to organize a petition demanding the immediate cessation of all fishing activities in Willowbrook Estates. The response was not what she had hoped for. The City Planning Department responded with a form letter explaining that decorative ponds on private property were not subject to city oversight. The Environmental Protection Agency sent a polite note stating that backyard fishing fell outside their jurisdiction. The Fish and Wildlife Commission actually sent a helpful brochure about sustainable fishing practices in private ponds. But Karen's masterpiece was the emergency HOA board meeting she called to address what she termed the fishing crisis. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 p.m. in the community center, and according to the notice she posted, attendance was mandatory for all homeowners. I decided to attend, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to hear Karen's presentation. The community center was packed, though I suspected most people were there for the entertainment value rather than genuine concern about my fishing activities. Karen had prepared a PowerPoint presentation titled "Protecting Our Community: The Fishing Threat." She had charts, graphs, and what appeared to be surveillance photos of me sitting peacefully beside my pond. The presentation was 43 slides long and included a detailed analysis of property values, noise studies, and environmental impact assessments. Karen, clicking through her slides, as you can see from slide 18, unauthorized fishing activities represent a clear and present danger to the character and value of our community. The introduction of fishing equipment creates visual pollution, while the act of fishing itself generates noise disturbances that disrupt the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly resident who lived 2 houses down from me, raised her hand. Karen, I can see his pond from my kitchen window. The man sits there quietly for a few hours on weekends. I've never heard any noise, and frankly, it's rather pleasant to watch. Karen, dismissing the comment, Mrs. Henderson, with respect, you may not be aware of the subtle environmental changes that fishing introduces to our ecosystem. Moving on to slide 22, we can see the potential for property value depreciation. The presentation continued for another 30 minutes, during which Karen outlined her comprehensive plan to ban all fishing activities in Willowbrook Estates. Her proposal included mandatory pond inspections, fishing equipment registration, and the establishment of a neighborhood fishing patrol to monitor compliance. When she finally finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Mr. Peterson, a retired attorney who served on the HOA board, cleared his throat. Mr. Peterson, carefully, Karen, I appreciate the thoroughness of your presentation, but I have to point out that the HOA doesn't have the legal authority to prohibit homeowners from fishing in ponds on their own property. This would almost certainly be considered an unreasonable restriction on property rights. Karen, Defensively, the HOA has broad authority to regulate activities that affect community standards and property values, but not activities that are clearly within the scope of normal residential use, Mr. Peterson replied. A homeowner fishing in his own backyard pond is about as normal as it gets. The tide was turning, and Karen could sense it. Karen, her voice becoming shrill, this isn't about one person fishing. This is about maintaining the standards that make Willowbrook Estates a desirable place to live. If we allow this, what's next? People will start raising chickens, growing vegetables, maybe even working on cars in their driveways. Mrs. Chin, another board member, looked confused. Karen, people are allowed to grow vegetables. Half the neighborhood has vegetable gardens. Karen, frantically, that's different. Those are approved gardens in approved locations using approved plants. This is unauthorized fishing with unauthorized equipment in an unauthorized location. The meeting was dissolving into chaos, with neighbors openly laughing at Karen's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. But Karen wasn't finished yet. Karen, standing up and shouting, "Fine. If the HOA won't act, I'll take this to the courts. I'll file an injunction. I'll sue for damages. I'll make sure everyone understands the threat this poses to our community." And that's exactly what she did. 2 weeks later, I received a summons to appear in civil court. Karen had filed a lawsuit seeking monetary damages for the alleged decrease in her property value, an injunction to stop all fishing activities, and attorney's fees. The lawsuit was 37 pages long and included photographs, expert witness statements, and a detailed analysis of comparable home sales in the area. What Karen hadn't counted on was my background as a paralegal and my extensive knowledge of property law. What she also hadn't anticipated was the reaction of my neighbors, who were becoming increasingly annoyed with her escalating campaign against what they saw as a harmless hobby. The court date was set for a Tuesday morning in October. I arrived at the courthouse with my attorney, a woman named Sarah Mitchell who specialized in property disputes and had seemed genuinely amused when I described Karen's campaign against my fishing activities. Karen arrived with her attorney, a serious-looking man in an expensive suit who kept glancing at his client with what appeared to be growing concern. She had brought 3 boxes of evidence, including hundreds of photographs, audio recordings of my fishing activities, and what she claimed were expert witness statements from environmental specialists. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had been dealing with frivolous lawsuits for over 20 years. She listened patiently as Karen's attorney presented the case, though her expression suggested she was not impressed with the evidence. Karen's attorney, reading from his notes, "Your Honor, the plaintiff contends that the defendant's unauthorized fishing activities constitute a private nuisance that has materially affected the use and enjoyment of her property, thereby causing a measurable decrease in property value." Judge Williams examined the photographs Karen had submitted. These photos show a man sitting in a chair beside a pond. "Is that correct?" Karen, unable to contain herself, "Yes, Your Honor, but you have to understand the broader implications. This isn't just about one person fishing. This is about the systematic undermining of community standards and property values. I have documentation showing that similar activities in other neighborhoods have led to." "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Williams interrupted, "please let your attorney handle the presentation of your case." My attorney's response was brief and to the point. She presented evidence that the pond had been designed and stocked for fishing by the previous owner, that my fishing activities created no noise or disturbance, and that Karen's own photographs showed a peaceful, well-maintained property that would be unlikely to decrease anyone's property value. My attorney, addressing the court, "Your Honor, this case represents a clear example of a frivolous lawsuit designed to harass a homeowner for engaging in perfectly legal activities on his own property. The plaintiff has provided no credible evidence of any actual damages, and her claims are contradicted by her own photographic evidence." Judge Williams spent several minutes reviewing the evidence, during which Karen fidgeted constantly and whispered urgently to her attorney. Finally, the judge looked up. "Judge Williams," in a stern voice, "Mrs. Whitmore, I have to ask, did you seriously expect this court to prohibit a homeowner from fishing in a pond on his own property?" Karen, standing up, "Your Honor, this isn't about fishing. This is about protecting property values and maintaining community standards. If we allow this kind of unauthorized activity to continue, it will set a precedent that undermines the authority of homeowners associations everywhere." Judge Williams' expression grew even more serious. "Mrs. Whitmore, homeowners associations do not have the authority to prohibit normal residential activities. Fishing in one's own backyard is about as normal as it gets. This lawsuit is not only without merit, it borders on harassment. The judge's words hit Karen like a physical blow. Her face went pale, and she seemed to shrink in her seat. But the worst was yet to come. Judge Williams, continuing, furthermore, this case represents a clear abuse of the court system. Filing frivolous lawsuits wastes judicial resources and imposes unnecessary costs on defendants. I am not only dismissing this case, I am awarding attorney's fees to the defendant and imposing sanctions on the plaintiff. The sanctions amounted to $5,000, plus my attorney's fees of another $3,000. Karen's face went from pale to bright red as the judge explained that frivolous lawsuits were a serious matter and that she expected all parties to use better judgment in the future. As we left the courthouse, Karen was in a state of shock. She had expected vindication and instead faced a bill for $8,000 and a public humiliation that would be the talk of Willowbrook Estates for months to come. But the real consequences were just beginning. Word of the lawsuit and its outcome spread quickly through the neighborhood. The story of Karen's expensive and failed attempt to stop a man from fishing in his own backyard became a source of endless amusement for the residents of Willowbrook Estates. More importantly, it had finally pushed the other HOA board members past their breaking point. 3 days after the court ruling, I received a call from Mr. Peterson. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting to discuss Karen's conduct and her fitness to serve as president. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning, and while it was technically closed to non-board members, Mr. Peterson suggested I might want to be available in case they had questions. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, and I decided to spend it fishing. As I sat beside my pond, I could see cars arriving at the community center across the street. The emergency board meeting was about to begin. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Chin, the HOA secretary. Mrs. Chin, speaking quietly, I thought you should know. We voted to remove Karen as president. The lawsuit was the final straw. She's also been voted off the board entirely. I could hear shouting in the background, Karen's voice rising above the others. She was not taking the news well. Mrs. Chin, continuing, she's demanding a recount, threatening to sue the HOA, and claiming this is all part of a conspiracy. I think you should probably avoid the community center for a while. As if on cue, I heard a car door slam with unusual force. Through my kitchen window, I could see Karen's silver SUV speeding out of the community center parking lot, taking the speed bump at a velocity that was definitely not HOA approved. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Karen standing on my porch, her face streaked with tears and her usually perfect hair disheveled. She looked like a woman who had lost everything that mattered to her. Karen, her voice breaking, are you happy now? Are you satisfied? They voted me out. After everything I've done for this community, after all the time and effort I've put into maintaining standards, they voted me out because of you and your stupid fishing. I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for her. For all her flaws, Karen had genuinely believed she was protecting the community. Her methods were wrong, her judgment was questionable, and her behavior was often outrageous, but her motivation had been, in her own twisted way, altruistic. Karen, I said gently, this isn't about fishing. This is about how you treated people. You called the police on a man for fishing in his own backyard. You filed a lawsuit over something that caused no harm to anyone. You turned a simple hobby into a neighborhood crisis. Karen, angrily, I was protecting property values. I was maintaining standards. Someone has to be willing to make the hard decisions. But you weren't making hard decisions, I replied. You were making unnecessary ones. You were creating problems where none existed. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling to process what had happened. The woman who had ruled Willowbrook Estates with an iron fist for 3 years had been unceremoniously removed from power over a fishing rod and a folding chair. Karen, quietly, what am I supposed to do now? Being HOA president it was important. It gave me purpose. Before I could respond, she turned and walked back to her car. As she drove away, I realized that Karen's story was ending not with a bang, but with a whimper. The woman who had wielded her clipboard like a weapon and treated every minor infraction as a federal case had been brought down by her own hubris and a simple fishing pole. The irony was not lost on me that as I watched her drive away, I was holding the very fishing rod that had started this entire saga. In a few minutes, I would return to my chair beside the pond, cast my line into the peaceful water, and enjoy the quiet satisfaction of a man who had stood his ground against petty tyranny and won. But first, I had to call my attorney and thank her for her excellent work. $8,000 was a hefty price for Karen to pay for her crusade against backyard fishing, but as Judge Williams had made clear, frivolous lawsuits have consequences. Karen had learned this lesson the hard way, and her shocked, tearful reaction to the court's ruling had been the perfect ending to her reign of HOA terror.